I'll cover some basic housekeeping rules first. So please stay on mute with your camera off for the duration of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded today and will be available after it has finished. We'll also be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please use the Q&A function or wait for the Q&A section at the end to ask your question. Next slide, please.
1 second. Can everybody put a little emote or raise your hand if you can hear okay, so we're just seeing if there's, okay, cool, we can hear it, that's fine, you can pop your hands down, we're just checking there. If you can't hear it, you might have to join and rejoin, but I was just checking that the majority of people seem to be able to hear, so we'll carry on. On to the next slide then, Jeff, for you.
Cool, thank you. Cool. Hello and welcome to the Road to Power Dissemination event. My name is Jeff Down. I am a Future Capabilities Programme Lead for NGED, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. I'll be joined by Louise and Ben from EA Technology, who will introduce themselves later. And EA have been driving this project for us. So Louise will now talk about the project in more detail.
Yes, so this webinar is for the Road to Power project, which began as a response to the unique challenge created by the decarbonisation of the construction industry, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, well, Ben will, and how we can go forward with the understanding that there's a likelihood of there's a large amount of electrification happening in that construction industry in the future. But the purpose of this project was to develop a concept tool, proof of concept, that demonstrates how flexible demand connection applications could be automated or in support of this increasing volumes of connection requests coming down the line. So that's the baseline for this project, and that's the real focus of this, is coming from that angle to solve that problem. So, and I'll just give a bit of an overview of the webinar structure before I hand over to Jeff. So we've got an introduction from Jeff. Ben will take the context and approach. And then I will talk through the solution development and the next steps, and then Ben will do the Q&A. And I realised I didn't introduce myself. I'm Louise Guthrie. I'm the project manager from EA Technology, who I've been running this project within EA Technology and working with NGED to develop the general concept of the tool and also the implementation of the tool. So in that solution development, I'll demonstrate what we've delivered in terms of the tool, and then, yeah, we'll be getting on with it. So back over to you, Jeff, for the introduction.
Cool, thanks, Louise. Next slide, please. Excellent, cool. The Road to Power project started in March last year, funded via the Strategic Innovation Funding Pot, which is a regulated innovation funding mechanism that Ofgem launched in 2021. For this 6-month alpha stage of the project, NGED is the project lead, and we are joined by the following partners: EA Technology, who are a leading solution provider of end-to-end power system or power engineering solutions, and we are also supported by Kia Group, who are a leading provider in infrastructure, services, construction and property development. Next slide, please. So in terms of who National Grid Electricity Distribution are, we are part of the National Grid Group, who also have the electricity transmission operator for England and Wales, as well as having a presence in the US, New York and New England. We have an extensive network in NGED operating across the East and West Midlands, South Wales and South West, and we supply roughly 8 million customers from a number of overhead lines, cables and substations. And as you can see, our core pillars here for keeping the power flowing, network reliability and safely, connections and operating the system. Next slide, please. Cool. So moving down a level in terms of who the Future Capabilities team are, we are the innovation team, and we support the business as the industry moves towards a net zero carbon future. Our strategy therefore focuses on ensuring that our solutions factor in the changes to demand and generation at a lower cost to consumers. We ensure that what we develop is compatible with the existing network and can be implemented into business as usual, and that we can demonstrate performance improvements against our KPIs, as well as provide value for money to consumers. Our project portfolio covers a large number of topic areas, and if you're interested to know more, do take a look at the nationalgrid.co.uk website for more information, and all our innovation projects, including this one, the learnings and results will be shared on the ENA's Smarter Networks portal. I will now hand over to Ben to introduce EA in more detail.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Ben Taylor. I'm a team leader within the Net Zero Transition team within EA Technology. For those that don't know EA, We've been innovating for electricity network operators for over 50 years. We provide a host of different services and products to DNOs, including a variety of innovative hardware, software products. We do training courses, forensic analysis, and general consultancy. Our main customer base and headquarters is in the UK, but we do have a global presence. We work in the USA, Australia, Singapore, and China, amongst other areas. The Net Zero Transition Team, or NZT, our EA Technologies consultancy arm. Our principal goal is to support the networks in the transition to their net zero future with a wide range of expertise within the team to enable it. We've delivered loads of projects with DNOs to help them prepare for the transition to DSOs. We've done local area energy planning, delivery of a bunch of software connection tools, as well as real-world on-site trials with multiple project partners. EA Technology, in the context of this project, are responsible for the development of a number of self-service connection tools for DNOs across the country, including for NGED, we provide a LV connection tool, and we do a HV connection tool for UKPN. My background is mostly within vehicle and machinery electrification, which is why this project was such a priority for me. Do you want to go to the next slide, Louise? So I'm going to give a brief introduction into the project, highlighting the project's origins and how we got to this as a proposed solution that we're going to present today. Next slide. So this project started out with a discovery phase, which happened last year, and the discovery phase highlighted some key problems that the electrification of construction sites are going to impose on the electricity grid. I've listed a few of them here, and I'll talk through them now. So one of the big problems is that it's a huge energy demand. So if you look across non-road mobile machinery across the UK now, it's about 20 terawatt hours of energy, which wasn't currently taken into account in the future energy demands expected on the network. But it's not just the fact that it's a large energy demand, it has some unique challenges. So one of the first ones is that the charging times are likely to be inflexible. So there's a couple of examples of this. So if you imagine a big construction scheme on the M1, they're going to be working at night, which means they'll charge during the day, which is a complete opposite to the way we currently assume vehicle charging will occur. But also if it's a city centre job, they're going to be working in the day for noise concerns, and therefore are going to charge during the night. The key here is that the charging times are likely to be relatively inflexible. The charging infrastructure is going to be really varied. It may even need to move with the scheme. It could be remote, and importantly, it might be temporary, or it could be a temporary thing that becomes permanent. And importantly, this is happening really, really fast. So national highways, as an example, are trying to get zero emission plant equipment on all their sites by 2030, which for a DNO is tomorrow, basically. And they're really driving the industry forward. And you can really see that a lot of people within the construction sector are really trying to shift quickly. As part of the project, we engaged with a really wide stakeholder group. So Kier Highways, who are a project partner, we engaged with them early on, but we also engaged with Keltbray, National Highways, HS2, DESNES, the Highways Authority and Utility Committee, amongst others. Almost everyone we engaged with were very aware that this is a problem, and they're really keen to be involved with tackling the issue. Next slide. So we use the discovery phase to understand the problem in greater detail and investigate if there are any potential solutions that could help alleviate the problem. One key problem that was raised repeatedly with everyone we spoke to was obtaining connections for these large schemes is really, really challenging, often because the network has insufficient capacity. Reinforcements are often really costly and can add significant project delays, and are often looked at quite late in the process. And there's also insufficient visibility around the network so that planners can really optimize their works to connect to the network. So they can't make good decisions on their connections. However, the discussions really highlighted a potential opportunity. So these connections are planned in great detail in advance of the connection. They know when they're going to be doing the works. They know how it's going to change over time. They have detailed shift patterns. They know when they're going to be working, when they're likely to charge, how many vehicles are going to be on site that are electrified. And the shift patterns often happen to align with when there's lower demand. So if you imagine that they would be working in the day and therefore they would not be working between 6 and 8, that's often when the peak demand is of the electricity network. Similarly, the earthworks season, which is when a lot of these large infrastructure projects are doing most of their heavy machinery work, that's between April and October, when the loading of the network is generally lower. So the question then became, could we align the loading that these sites are expected to be using to the actual available capacity on the network to allow them to connect without reinforcement? So the way that it's assumed right now, without these flexible connections, is you would look at the maximum demand that they're ever going to use, and you would look at the minimum capacity across the whole year, and if they don't match, there's a problem. But in reality, it's a lot more dynamic than that. So is there something that we can do to enable these flexible connections to match the actual demand versus the actual capacity? So the project quickly shifted to enabling this, and we looked at developing a proof of concept self-service connection tool, which planners of works could utilize to enable them to obtain these types of connections. And with that, I'll hand over to Louise, who will take you through the proof of concept we developed during this phase of the project. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Ben. So yes, we had a successful discovery phase last year, and we went straight into the alpha in October, and we developed a solution based off of the sort of high-level key points from the discovery phase. So what were these key points that we wanted to get right with this concept development approach? I think the first thing is about getting the application right. So we've identified these immediate wins basically through discussions with some of the connections teams within NGED to develop sort of what are some goals here. And the tool really, and I'd like to make sure we highlight this is for an HV connections tool. And within this part of the tool, we've looked at an 11 kV network. But the tool centralizes the collection of the proposed connection details through a sort of standard format, which I'll go through when I demonstrate the tool. And we're seeing this here as if we're assuming a large amount of new connections on the network. This could reduce the administrative burden on connections teams having to go back to get request further information from the customer that's wanting to connect there. Secondly, here we're enabling new approaches, and this is where it's really innovative within this connections tool. I mean, first and foremost, something we identified from stakeholders when we discussed with the construction industry is that they do really they want to know more so that they can plan better. They don't want to be difficult. They want it to be as easy for them. And by visualizing the available capacity on the network, that immediately is a big win for the customer that wants to connect to the network. And secondly, the big innovative part of this project, as Ben was saying, was we're assessing customer demand profile against, well, we've used 48 half-hourly periods just because that's standard within our load flow analysis tool. But we're showing a variation in time. Demand is varied during the day, and that means it can be assessed against it. The connection can be assessed against that on both sides. And what we're saying here as well is that we're providing all the information to users, because again, when we spoke to the connection tool, the construction industry, the connection tool needs to have enough information so they can work through it without having to maybe respond, ask more questions to NGED throughout the tool journey. So we've got a few user journey changes in terms of how the connections process could be approached, and we've got a few technical wins that really come together, because I think what we want to say here is it's making it easier for everybody involved, and but it's still keeping that robust level of sort of security of supply on the network. So And you'll see there's an incentive to continue the conversation with NGED after the preliminary connection offer has been provided at the end of this tool. It's important to remember throughout the webinar that this tool is in a conceptual format, so it doesn't offer any firm connection offers. I'm leaving that decision up to the next phase of the project, how that will be approached. But what it's really doing is sort of suggesting an approach that can change how this connection offer works. And I'll pop on to the next slide, because this is a note on the connection types that we've implemented during the through the tool, alongside the standard connection option, which is obviously there within it. We've utilised, so NGED's existing flexible connection policies are currently used primarily for connecting generation. There is some leeway in some places, but they're written with sort of generation in mind for a lot of these, not demand. So working with NGED on this project, we took their time profiled standard connection process and their curtailed connection process as the basis for the connections within this proof of concept tool. I would say the user journeys are similar, as in you can see on the right hand side there, we've got a bit of a flow chart that is utilised within the process to sort of decide whether curtailable or flexible connection is appropriate. And there obviously, it tends to be more of a legal agreement after the technical assessment has been done that sort of determines which connection type is used. But even here, this is a big step forward in terms of if a customer has a flexible demand, that's an opportunity to be utilised for the network to connect customers quicker. And I will say, while we've used construction industry as an example for all of this, within speaking with NGED and looking at further and wider opportunities for flexible connections to be used, things like bus station charging. So if you have a large amount of electric buses, they charge overnight because they're used during the day. If the night demand at a site is lower, that's the perfect opportunity for a time profiled standard connection to be utilised, because it just means that overnight the customer can then use the full amount of their connection. During the day it's limited. So within this alpha stage of the project, I'm not making any business process decisions for NGED. We're just providing the concept tool, but that will definitely be continued forward into the beta phase and the next phase of the project. So to avoid technical, I think doing a technical demonstration live is probably one of my worst nightmares. I've got a video. Here's what I prepared earlier to utilise a common phrase. But what I'm going to do here is show how a tool can be used by a user to develop their connection request. So I've got a little bit of a dead air to start, but it shows that there's the way we see this tool being used is that it's by a user that logs in, because I think it's quite rare for a lot of these large construction companies to just have one single connection request. Obviously that might be the case, but a lot of these large construction companies will have a team of people who are developing lots of site profiles. And I'll pause it quickly there just to say I've highlighted throughout this, and there's a refer to national grid electricity distribution. What we're saying here is that within this alpha concept tool, there would be an opportunity for at any point the user to go, okay, I'm not really sure what I'm doing now, or my question's too complex. Let's have a proper conversation with NGED about this connection. But what we're saying here is that the construction industry and lots of people who are doing these HP connections, they'll probably have more than one option in mind. So what we're saying is that within a user profile, you have multiple options for your site profiles. And what we've got here is we've got one for webinar demonstration, and we've got a little button for the creating a new site profile. So what we've got here is a little bit of an example of the information that's collected, and we've got a nice example of the tooltips that pop up. So for example, here, I'll pause it quickly. I think I clicked through this a little bit too fast here. But we've got an option for the user within NGED's region, obviously. You can select your location type by postcodes, grid reference, latitude and longitude. Because we recognise that, especially within the construction industry, you might not have a nice postcode to place your site on. So grid references, latitude and longitudes. And throughout the tool, these are all aligned at the bottom of the maps, so that it's not it's always available to know if you want to go by grid reference or latitude and longitude. Yep, so we've got a nice postcode in the South Wales here, and it has a little bit of a tooltips about information for if you need more information about what type of postcode and grid reference, if something's going wrong. I've paused it here quickly to go over we've got a maximum site loading in kVA. What we're doing here is, because obviously not every customer is going to want to have a flexible connection, they still need to sort of assess what the maximum site load will be across the year. So that's your connection, your overall connection request. And we use that as a basis for a lot of the verification throughout the tool. So on to the next one, we've got the connection details page. So what we've got here is we've got something which I think is important to highlight here is this temporary connection. So right now, temporary connections are sort of, you ask for a request and your connection may become a permanent connection, or it might be a temporary connection, but I don't think it's necessarily captured in terms of that load will now be freed up in maybe 2 years. If that's a temporary connection for a construction site, they need it intensely for a 2-year project where they're doing some remedial work somewhere, and then after that, actually that network is now going to have freed up capacity. So that's important, I think, as we start to look at how the network's being used. We want to be a lot more aware of when things are coming on and dropping off across the board. And it's just something that's interesting from the point of view from a concept tool. On the right here, I'm demonstrating a bit of the information that we provide. These are just sort of standard texts about the types of connections that can be offered within the tool. And we've put that in because we've got the bottom question there about, is this site suitable for a non-standard connection? That there will allow the user to be taken through the non-standard, the connection options, which is a large part of this project. So I've not bothered to go through the standard connection user journey. And you'll see here that you put in the connection start and end date for the temporary connection. If you choose a non-temporary connection, you just get a little start date button. And we put, I think I've clicked forward for a bit. And it's even when you try and do all you can do to, there we go. All you can do to make the technical stuff work, you can still click the wrong button. So yeah, here we've got that little tooltip about what a non-standard connection is here. So the user has gone through and said, yes, I'm happy to be assessed for a non-standard connection. So that means they've got a little bit of extra work to put in. So what we put here is that, do they want to be assessed for a daily load profile? And as we're again basing this off the construction industry, we're assuming that these daily peak loads are happening during shifts. So here we've got an option for your shifts to be put in. Here's 8 till 5, and then we've got an 8 till 3 in the morning one. So what we're saying here is that this is helping us to give a bit more detail to that load profile that the user's been created without having to force them to fill in like each hour of the day maximum load. We're giving them a bit of this is still a level before it's probably a detailed description of their demands across their site. And then I think it will show once I've left myself a lot of time to speak on this video. So what we're seeing, you'll see it on the next phase, on the next part of the screen, is that we've given it the option to have 3 different shift patterns across the day. Obviously, in a longer part of a more in-depth part of the tool, you could probably have more than that, but we've tried to keep it simple for the concept tool. Because also, as you'll see on this page, for each of those shift patterns, you have to put in a maximum usage throughout that time of day. So if you add more and more and more, you end up with many more columns to fill in. We had a little bit of back and forth about the best way to input these, whether you could upload a CSV file. And again, for the concept tool, we've decided to go with discrete boxes. And hopefully in a second, I will edit one of these boxes to show that you see it on the map as well. So if it allows a little bit of verification for the user when they're putting it in to see, does that look right for me? Does my site load profile look like that? And very clearly, when I'm recording this, I'm very clearly making sure you know that. And what it does is it highlights it across the month. So the low line there is the non-peak, and then the 2 different shift periods are the top 2 lines there. And on a that's a temporary connection, so you'll see that it goes from April to December, because that's what the dates we put in the last page. If it's a non-temporary connection, it goes across the whole year. So this is just an example of it's remembering what's been used, so that the user can then just fill it in as they go along. And we're trying to remember that the users at this point of the tool might not necessarily be fully aware of the network. I'll pause it quickly there. That was just me demonstrating that if you put in, let me go back a second, if you put in a number larger than the maximum connection you requested, it won't let you do it. So yeah, I've put in 2 MVA and it goes, nope, you can't do that. A little bit of verification is always handy. So we're on this, and that's one I created earlier. But what we've got here is I've zoomed out. This is a lovely town in South Wales. And what you'll see is all those cables are amber. That's very specifically done for this demonstration. And I'll show in the next demonstration a little bit more about what it looks like when it's green and not amber. But yeah, and you can click on existing substations. You've got the cables that come from NGED's cable records. We used their common information model cable records for their networks. So that's the basis for this map. And here you see I'm drawing the site. It's a lovely empty field, probably on a hill. We've not got that far in terms of if it's actually physically possible. We're assuming that the user will know if it's possible or not. That's me placing the substation on the site where the little transformer will go, and then here's me drawing the cable to connect into that cable underground. We've got a nice little, what I'm highlighting here, the distances of the cables, and then yeah, you go through that, and here's the interesting part. So the user has put in their demand across the year, and the cable also has a demand across the year. That's a little button to click to go back to the start if you decide this is not what you want. But you can see that we've got each of the half-hour periods across the month, and then across the whole year. And as I scroll down, you can see some of them are red. So green up the top, red. Keep scrolling down. There we go. So what's happening here is that it's saying, well, during these times, the capacity available in the network is not available at that point. I will also say that we use these numbers. They aren't representative of the network in that region. There was a little bit, what we've had to do is adjust it because we wanted to make the point of we were focused more on the demonstrating of the capabilities of the tool rather than necessarily an accurate representation of the network in the area. Also because we didn't want people to take anything away and say, oh, I can connect there in that small town. So what you're seeing here is that there's a bit of a pop-up that says, oh, it gives you the availability of the cable, and it's also saying that's the numbers in the boxes is the number that the user put in. So what you're seeing here is that there's some availability after the time and there's some availability before, but you'll also notice what I want to highlight here is that you can see the drop between April and May and then September to October. Going back to what Ben said is that we've put in some logic that shows there is a difference in availability of capacity on the network between the seasons, and we've just done seasonal for this point, but there's no reason that with greater information from the network we'd be able to show more variability across the year. Again, it gets quite complicated quite quickly, so we wanted to really just be clear with the purpose of the tool. So what we're saying here is there's options at the bottom. You've got to adjust your load profile, you've got to change your point of connection, or there's some opportunity to connect a curtailed connection. Once it moves on to the button, which will do the adjust load profile, because again, what we're saying here is we're assuming this is a construction industry user, so they have an opportunity to go, I really left myself a lot of dead air there. You'll see the opportunity, the construction industry will go, well, actually, we're planning this out in quite a lot of detail, could we actually utilize some of that free capacity in some of those times? Or could we adjust when things are happening? And hopefully that means, I don't know what I was trying to visualize here. I think I'm showing here that there's a difference between the April and May. So go back to adjusting the load profile. And what we're doing here is actually, can we change the shift pattern for this later period to go, could we start at 10 at those times, or well, 9:30, and could we move it back? Again, this is just an option. It's not saying this is exactly what will happen, but we're also noting that there were some of those sites where, some of those times where it definitely wasn't going to work, even if you moved it about. So there's a bit of a time you can adjust the maximum usage that you're expecting during those time periods and go, well, actually, could we knock that down? Could we find a way around that? Could we be better planned, or could we smear that demand later on in the afternoon so that it's not necessarily all going to occur during that peak? So we've come back, it saved it, it's all still in the same place, and we've saved it, and what we'll notice is there's a lot less red when we go back to this. There's still some red. Let's say the user couldn't be bothered, couldn't like work out if that wasn't physically possible for them to change those demands. But what they can do now is they can then click on the curtailed connection button, which hopefully I will do in a moment. And then what it does is it saves it, and then you click through to the next page. I save it again, and then I go to the curtailed connection. There we go. You learn all your mistakes when you have to rewatch them after being recorded. And we've also got a little disclaimer in here to say that it's not necessarily, this is not necessarily a final offer, but it's automated for the purposes of this tool. Again, that's just for us making sure we're adding in some warnings here, some caveats. And at any point on this tool, you can go back and edit it. This gives you a summary, so you can say, yeah, this is actually all what I wanted. This is where it was in the tool. And then, yeah, I'm really highlighting that we screenshot it and save it. And also it records all that information they put through. And then it makes sure it keeps your, yeah, I think you have to click through. It means that you can go back to any point. And then, yes, that's it. We put in a little bit about the dates. That's just, obviously it wouldn't connect today, well, yesterday, as of where I saved this one. So we've put in a little bit of logic that pushes the actual connection date back a little bit just to start to do it. And I'll highlight the customer cost is just a static number that we put in here. And similarly with the position of the LIFO stack for the curtailed offer. So, but what's interesting is that we save the curtailable connection summary there. We've only put it by number here. We'd be able to put it into a lot more detail with like regards to which months it would be curtailed and things like that. We'd probably just do similar to what was existing on the red-green page. Yeah, so that's the end of the concept part of the tool, because we obviously can't hand it over to NGED at that point. But you go back to where you were on the front page, and a user could have multiple of them. So one last bit, because you'll notice that there was a few buttons on it that you could accept a curtailed offer, or you could change your location. So I've got a different demonstration site here, just to quickly go through this one before I get to the end of it. So we've got demonstration site, and you'll notice it's the same location. I've lowered the level of it, the size of the connection a little bit. It's 850. It's not a temporary connection. So we've still got the daily load profile, and we've still got the similar ones. In this one, I've been a little bit lazy, and I've put the maximum usage just at the max of the connection, because I've just wanted to prove the specific point. And you'll notice that on the off-peak ones, there's still a bit of a change. And what I wanted to highlight here really quickly, actually I'll pause it, is that we have a button to upload a red line boundary. So if a user has a site plan, I've uploaded it here, and then you can draw across it, and you'll be able to draw on your site. So I screenshotted it and then drew a red line boundary on it and then implemented it back in, which is quite interesting, and it's useful for the sort of sites that we'll be working with if they have a very interesting or unusual site that's not just a rectangle on a page. So what we'll say here is we've got it on amber, and it said, oh, you've got sometimes, I've made it relatively slim in terms of the year, but let's say you absolutely have to be using that maximum capacity at those times of years. So what we're saying is that if there's still some availability, but what we're saying is you can change the point of connection. So if you zoom out here, you'll notice that I think previously that was amber in the last one. And we've got a nice playing field there where you'll never be able to get planning permission for a site. But if you put in, what we're saying is, well, actually, that site, could we move it over there? We're thinking about, again, the terms of a construction compound, where maybe it's just where they're going to be charging all their electric vehicles or something like that. So the actual position of it is maybe less specific. Obviously, it's not the same case in every single site. So we've got a nice little place for a substation. Bramble Close is well placed for a cable to go through it, probably not in real life. And then yes, so now you'll notice that instead of going through to another part, we save it. And it's green, and what it does is it goes through the connection summary, and it still says flexible connection, but as we go down to the bottom, it's still got the same load profile, the site location is changed, it still provides you with the expected total site load, and then what it does is that it says, no, you actually don't need a flexible connection, you go to a standard connection. And similarly, we've pushed back the actual connection date and things like that. That would be implemented in greater detail in the next phase of the project. But there's no requirements for them to have a flexible connection or anything like that. So that's two possible user journeys that we're thinking of that will be used within this tool. And again, they can go to the accept the connection offer details, and they'll get passed through to NGED for whatever the next stage of this tool would end up being. So it's, as I've noted throughout this, we've engaged with construction industry stakeholders, and we've shown off the tool to them, and they've provided some feedback, but they've had positive interest in utilising this tool specifically for them, the development stages of the project. They very much, this is something where they have to do lots of connection requests, especially if it's some of the stakeholder meetings have included people from capital projects like HS2, highways authorities. So even if you're looking at construction industry from we're going to build a building here, it's still useful because maybe they'll need a curtailed connection to start with, but by having a larger connection available, they can be curtailed for 2 years while they build, and then actually the full network connection will be available once the project's been completed. But also in the development stages, if you're looking at where you're going to be placing compounds along a motorway, along a site location, this allows them to be a lot more quicker with their sort of assumptions, and they can do a bit more of a high level view of like, okay, that's absolutely a no-go, or that's a possibility. And these sites are likely to be able to utilise the different connection types that we've used within this tool. And similarly, they also offered us some other ideas that they'd like to include in the tool moving forward. So something that they'd obviously have to do a lot of is carbon accounting when it comes to planning. And also they'd like a bit more visibility of where they'd be on the connection queue. I think that's possibly, that's definitely a much greater sort of discussion point further on. But I think there's a level of transparency that is being developed within the industry about connections, about network availability, network capacity. So there's reasonable, I would say, sort of consideration that could occur later down the line. Whether it's a day one business as usual available feature, that's a different story. That's something I'll discuss in the next phase. But it highlights that if they are provided the information, they're very likely to be using it. So I think that's a very positive thing forward, and it shows that the electricity networks are taking into consideration they are customers at the end of the day. So next steps. Obviously, this alpha phase of the project, we've developed a sort of tool. We've started to look into what it would look like, and it's quite developed on that front. And I'd just like to take a little step back and say, because obviously I'm focused on this from the electrification of construction sites, but there's a wider connections context. This is a self-serve, and looking through the major connections annual report, which was released at the end of last year, well, 2024 one. The self-serve connections tool is on sort of roadmap. It's something that is of interest. There's obviously one already at LV within NGED region, but there's also metrics around requiring that back and forth to get information from potential connections. So this would have a standard format, whatever that standard format needs to be, however much information needs to be collected at what stage in the project can be decided, and it means that there's less back and forth, and it means the customer isn't having to go trawl through more things, and it means that if they're doing multiple connection requests, if they're on a big project, it means that they can just have the same thing for each site. They don't have to, they all know what's required of them when it comes to it. Similarly, there's obviously that reduced time to connect aspect of some of them may accept a curtailed connection for a while, and this will help them sort of design their site plans and their workloads around when they'll have capacity and when they won't. And it also means that the network is more aware of, if they know that someone's connected curtailed and they know that they would need this amount of demand later down the line, that means that plans along the network will be able to be probably a lot more sort of well thought out, because they know where it's coming and the user has provided them with the information of what demand is coming, and both sides have agreed on, yes, down the line that reinforcement works will be completed, but in the meantime you do get something. And we also have to remember that, we're going back to the electrification of construction sites, they work with generators all the time. They have site generators and things like that, so if they are curtailed at some point, it's not unlikely that the construction industry will be like, well, we can get our grid connection most of the time, and then at this other time we'll just have to make sure we have these generators on site. So there's also a bit of flexibility from both sides there. And I would say a big thing here is also the increased customer awareness of the connections process, and what information is required for them to go through the connections process. And then finally, just to wrap it up right in time for the questions, the concept tool comes at a key time, I would say, for connections, specifically for the automation of the connections process. Obviously, the first one there, formalising procedure and policy, that will absolutely have to be developed in close contact with NGED about what's happening next, and also how it can be done safely and securely so that the network remains functional and accommodate all these new connections. The concept tool has started to sort of understand where these policies are coming from in terms of existing policy and where there's probably gaps and what might need to be developed further. The alpha phase kind of, I suppose, only utilises the capabilities of the tool with a sort of optioneering or site development focus. That will absolutely be developed further to make it a more mature, yes, this is how we want a connection, this is how it will work. That will require the tool to be, the network model to be expanded across the entire license area and verify loads. So one issue we sort of had on the project was just sort of making sure that loadings were suitable and reasonable for the network, and similarly that the network model was connected correctly. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that the data is real and matches what's happening in the real world so that users aren't left disappointed. And that's where there's a lot of verification left to happen. But absolutely possible, absolutely feasible, just takes a little bit of work. And then similarly, this last one, obviously we look at stuff from an electrical networks point of view, but there are those additional features like carbon accounting, a little bit more information on sort of the wider scope of their projects that can be used that can be developed by working with stakeholders, the sort of industries that will be connecting at HV across the network, to understand the value add functions to this sort of tool and say it's not just a connections tool, it doesn't just do this, it adds more value for the customer, and it means that they'll probably be more pleased, and if it does what they need it to do, and that gives us a little bit more context and information, I don't see how that's a bad thing. So lots still to do in terms of developing it into a business as usual. It's about business policies, it's about technical verification, but all of that is very feasible, and I think it's a very valuable project to continue on with. So what I'll do there is we can move on to the Q&A section, and I think it was only a minute over, which was, that's very well done from me, pat on my back. But Jeff will be the sort of leader of the Q&A section.
Cool, thank you, Louise. As you said, yeah, time for the Q&A. So if you would like to ask a question, please post it into the Q&A part of Teams at the top of the screen, or you can put your hand up and we can take you off mute to ask directly. I should add as well, if you have any sort of location specific or connection application questions, please note we'll not be able to answer your question on today's session. I would advise you to reach out to the connections team or drop a note in the chat, and I'll add some contact details. So with that, I can see we've had a couple of questions in the chat. So I propose to sort of, for those who, and some answers as well. So I'll go through those from sort of the first ones. first one we've had from Martin around, can you please clarify what you mean by 22 terawatt hour demand? I can see Ben's provided an answer already, but just to sort of add a bit of context. So NESO has predicted as part of its FES and DFES analysis that the demand could increase more rapidly, with one of its scenarios suggesting a rise of 20 terawatt hours per year in 2030. As you might be aware, sort of NESO publishes a range of scenarios ranging from sort of low transition to high transition to net zero. So it's important to understand this project alongside a number of other projects, both innovation and business as usual, such as the connection reform work, are working towards those future demands that customers need and want. So as consumers transition to net zero in the most efficient way for electricity bill payers. So hopefully that answers that question from Martin. Another question we've had through, Louise, I might pass this one to you, is around shifts. So question from Ryan is, could there be a possibility of confusion asking users to indicate shifts? So shifts could be viewed as activity on site when actually the load profile, equipment, etc. Do you want to elaborate on that one in terms of our engagement?
Yes, so very, very good question, and one we did grapple with over the course of the project. So we ended up going for sort of shift periods or periods of peak demand to reduce the sort of, to align it kind of more similarly with what already we sort of how we look at the network right now. However, during the process of the project, we did engage with stakeholders, and one thing we were trying to tease out of them is what availability they have of their site demands and how they're broken down by technology. And it's something which I would say I would really have liked being able to get in as part of the tool, and it wasn't quite there in terms of availability of charging profiles and how things work in terms of availability of information from the sort of the construction industry in terms of the new electric vehicles that they'll have on site. Because I think what would be very useful for this sort of tool, if it was to be developed more as a road to power, with a little bit more focus on that charging periods construction industry, is for them to have a sort of, we're going to have this many electric diggers on site, we will be charging, we need them to be available at this time. Then that means there's a rough estimation of when the charging period will have to occur. So I do agree with you, is that's probably, we're putting a little bit of onus on the end user here to basically be aware of their site profiles and their load profiles, which they said they did have quite a lot of information about that. They do have quite a lot of available knowledge of what their demands are across the months. But yeah, from your point of view, if it's a slightly less developed user, if they had some option for less shift patterns and more charging times, that is absolutely something we'd like to invest further time and effort into during the next phase of the project, to be more specific about that.
Cool, thanks, Louise. And just to add to that, terminology and user journeys is a key element to this project. So for the beta project, my plan over the next few months is to look at how we take the results from this project and really step it up. So not just for NGED, but something that all networks and wider industry partners can take forwards and implement. Cool, thank you. So we've had another question from Martin around, is the construction plant and machinery subject to the same legislation that the UK government has applied to the car industry that will prohibit the manufacture of sort of ICE cars post 2030? Sort of discounted sort of the news yesterday in terms of what's been happening. I don't believe construction is included, as the legislation refers specifically to cars and vans. But as we've seen with a large number of operators, as cost comparity becomes closer between sort of electrified vehicles, and we've seen a lot of manufacturers such as JCB becomes closer, businesses will likely make that transition across. So this project is all about enabling those large operators to be able to transition across. Looking at the project team, Ben and Louise, is there anything else to add to that one?
Just on my point, I suppose it's a bit of an unsure future, I guess, about whether they'll go hydrogen, electrification, what if there's some other third technology that's hot in the heels. I think from a network's point of view, it's about being prepared for whichever route they choose. So, and it's also being prepared about what timelines that will happen. So I'm not 100% sure about exactly which legislations will be applied to the non-road mobile machinery. However, it's better for the networks to be prepared for those eventualities, I'd say, with these sort of tools to say, oh, we're expecting some large demands on the network. I don't know, Ben's probably closer to the tech side on that point.
Yeah, I suppose the one thing I would add is there's a drive to transition anyway without the legislation, and every construction firm we got in touch with was basically trying to transition, trying to figure out how they can electrify. So like Jeff said, I don't believe that it is the same legislation. Construction machinery is definitely further behind than electric vehicles, but there's just a general drive within the construction industry to decarbonise, and connecting to the grid is definitely seen as a barrier.
Cool, thank you. Louise, another question that's come in. The curtailment assessment in the tool seems to be quite simplified to a day per month. Why is this, and how can this be adapted to the actual process?
Yep, yeah. So if anybody's aware and familiar of how curtailment assessments happen, they happen across the whole year, and they're a lot more sort of granular than what we showed within the tool. So this is primarily down to a level of data that's available that we wanted to put through the tool. I think if I did the maths, it's 365 times 48 is something like 17,500, I think, from when I was doing some of the counting. So that's a lot of individual points across a year to do a full assessment. And I think what we've done within the tool is simplify it down to sort of a maximum within that period to give a little bit more of a again, if we're looking at it from a sort of the function of this tool is not to give a final curtailment assessment offer, it's to get the user in a position where they're ready to accept one at a later date. So we're not saying it's absolutely finalized at that last page, but we're saying that the user should go into the next stage of the connection agreement with more information about when they're curtailing it. And the key thing is to sort of give them an opportunity to adjust their demand profiles to avoid the curtailment if they really want to. But I think there would still be a further opportunity for a curtailment assessment to take place at the next stage.
Cool, thanks. Thanks, Louise. Nice question. Another one for you actually is what data was available to develop the tool, and what data is needed to develop the tool into business as usual? Yeah,
so we used the Common Information Model from NGED's, it's downloadable for their HV network to drive the basis of the network data. And I would say will require a little, we used that because it was what was available and what was best placed for this project. I would say we probably would need a little bit more specificity to do a lot more of drive the details, because obviously there was still some gaps in the available data from that part, but we just picked a part of the network where it was reasonably well connected, and we could make general assumptions about what assets were on the network. I'd say the key thing here is the loading data on the networks. That will probably require a little bit more development work moving forward in terms of what's available and what can be reasonably assumed of what's monitored on the HV networks down to the LV networks at those substations, so that it can be updated reasonably often so that users are getting the most up-to-date information. As you'll notice, as I've said throughout the demonstration, we did simplify the numbers to be more, it was round numbers and larger numbers so that we could prove the concept. So I think it'll be a drive to understand what's the level of granularity that's required for the load data on the network to make the correct assumption, the correct analysis, so that people can connect. So I think there's still a bit of work to be done on that, but I think that similar work that's happening across all parts of all the networks is understanding load data on the network, and that network data, just getting those digital twins, moving them forward. I don't know if Ben has any other further comments on that.
I covered it.
Cool.
Cool, excellent, thank you. So just to remind everybody, if you would like to ask a question, please post it in the Q&A part of Teams, or you can put your hand up and we can take you off mute to ask directly. We do have one question I can see, which from Sam is this is it that the site is temporary and at the end of the work the connection is removed? So just for a background, it's very dependent on the type of connection required, type of activity that's happening or that's required. So, for example, a construction of, say, a new road, there won't be any future requirements to connect long term. But something like, say, a new housing development, something like that, there will be a discussion with the connections team in terms of what those future requirements look like. Again, probably likely requiring a different type of connection, possibly reinforcement. I think that covers that one. Unless Louise and Ben, I've missed anything off?
No, it's just, yeah, it's very on the, it would probably require a little bit more granularity in terms of, because right now I think once you disconnect a temporary connection, it's sort of, that's it. This would be looking more along a time period of, oh, it's going to disconnect here, so can new stuff be added in that area, or can that be reused or something like that? So there's a little bit of it would be an update to processes and policies, I would say. But right now, yeah, very on the lines of what Jeff said there.
Cool, thank you. Right, with the last 2 minutes of today's webinar, just to cover in terms of the next steps, the beta project application we're planning to submit in October, and over the coming months we will be looking and reviewing the options for the application to UKRI. But if there are no other questions, thank you for attending today's session. If you have any other questions on the project, do please reach out. And I'd like to thank the presenters today, Louise and Ben, for presenting the great progress and work that we've done. So I think we can finish there. Have a good rest of the day.
Quick hand raise. Oh, is that was supposed to be a clap? It's okay. We'll do a thumbs up too.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today.